Relics? I'd like to call the meeting to order and thank everybody for their patience as we got ourselves to quorum. And Susan, roll call.
Ms. Friedman,
I'm present.
Mr. Arnold,
I'm here.
Ms. Banks, Ms. Bell, Mr. Brown, Ms. Carter,
Here.
Mr. Janai, Reverend Gordon,
Here.
Ms. Harding,
Here.
Ms. Mendoza-Locke,
Here.
Mr. Knowles, Mr. O'Connor,
Here.
Ms. Rodriguez, Dr. Russell, Mr. Stengel,
Here.
Major White.
Here.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. Next, we'd like to recognize our visitors, starting with Richard.
Richard Arnold, John Bush, Michael Carter, board staff.
Amy Perkmeyer, board staff.
Shannon Hedge, board staff.
Hold on. You're not gonna get away that easy, Shannon.
What row?
Shannon Hitch, she's our newest employee, our accounting specialist, so let's welcome her. All right, Paul, sorry about that, go ahead.
Welcome.
Recovery Council and a board trustee, St. Paul Community Center.
Latrice Flowers, board staff.
Robert Kasperzak, board staff.
Alexandria Thomas Holland, neighborhood properties.
Lynette here, neighborhood properties.
Casey Smith, I'm with Ascend Innovations in Dayton, Ohio.
Alec Rawson, Director of Engineering, Summit Innovations.
Josh Grasham, the CEO of Ascend Innovations.
Andrew Sokolnicki with Ascend Innovations.
Tina Mason, board staff.
Awesome. Well, thank you and welcome everyone. We appreciate you coming. Looking at the items for the consent agenda from the meeting minutes from December 20th, 2022, the Planning and Oversight Committee report, the Treasurer's report, Lucas County Guardianship Services Board allocation, late submission of fiscal year 22 audit reports, the health officer designation, and the executive and nominating committee report. Oh, yeah, I said the minutes, the first, I think at first, I'm pretty sure, yeah, we need to make sure I do that. Okay, thank you, Scott. Is there anything to remove from the agenda, the consent agenda? Any questions? No? Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Susan, it's time for you to do roll call.
Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Ms. Banks, Ms. Carter,
Yes.
Reverend Gordon,
Yes.
Ms. Harding,
Yes.
Ms. Mendoza-Locke,
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Stengel,
Yes.
Major White.
Yes.
Thank you, Susan. And now we're turning the floor over to you, Phil.
All right, as Scott talked about in the last meeting, that we would provide you with some data to help with the purchasing plan. It's an attachment here. It should kind of look like a colored Excel sheet. We've already presented this data to you before, but we wanted to give you 18 months worth of data. So the way this reads is you have the provider, program, and line of business, and those are in they're kind of coded white up here. If it's blue, coded blue, it's calendar year 22, so that would be half of the calendar year that we had in there, so January through June. And then the orange clear at the end is everything from calendar year 2021. So again, all of this information has been presented to you all through the other performance reports, but we just wanted to have something for you moving forward with 18 months worth of data on it. And again, consistent with those performance reports, we have whether they were on track during that period and any issues are noted on there as well. This is for information only, so we don't need anything, any motion for this. Is there any questions?
The relevance of it is as we begin to discuss our 120-day notice recommendations, we wanted you to have the information up front that we're looking at. Plus, we will have the next 6 months available for you at our February meeting, March meeting. Thank you. So this is part of our purchasing plan discussions, and it's just really for yours to review.
Okay, thank you very much. Next we have Steve up with the strategic plan.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to ask for everyone to bear with me a little bit. We're doing something slightly different. This is going to be a little bit of a hybrid configuration. I'm asking to have the lights turned down a little bit. We're using some of our new technology, which some of you have seen before and some of you may not, the OWL. So this will be interactive. On pages 12 through 14 of your board packet, you will find an overview of the board's 2023 strategic plan, which is comprised of 5 priority strategic goals and their supporting strategies. Additionally, an explanation of the Infrastructure Transformation Project, ITP plan, which is the critical strategy supporting strategic goal 4 of the strategic plan under technological infrastructure and its supporting systems, processes, data management strategy will be detailed during this presentation. Say that 5 times faster. Today's presentation will be done, as I stated, in a hybrid format with the Rama Consulting team starting the overall presentation by presenting the 2023 strategic plan remotely via Zoom. Rama Consulting will suspend their part of the presentation after and going up into strategic goal 4. The Ascent Innovations team from Dayton, who introduced themselves not long ago, will then, in person, will then brief the Infrastructure Transformation Project Plan portion of strategic goal 4. Once the Ascend Innovations team has completed its presentation on the ITP as a subcomponent of the overall strategic plan, Rama Consulting will complete the rest of their 2023 strategic plan presentation. Questions are welcome from trustees at any time during the presentation, or we can hold them until the end. Clearly up to you. I'm going to start off by introducing Tiffany Wright from Rama Consulting, and I'm going to turn it over to her without further ado.
Well, thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you guys making accommodations for this. I had a trip scheduled to be out of the country before we obtained this contract, so I was happy that we were able to accommodate me being able to present this virtually. I am joined by Naomi Iyasu, who has been present during most of the work that we have been doing during this session. She'll begin to share her screen here as I'm overview the presentation. And I also have Leslie Westerfelt from my team on, just in case I have any connectivity issues or get disconnected. We are in South Africa and they have load shedding here where the power does tend to go out without notice. So I've got some backup support on the line just the presentation can continue seamlessly. So as Steve mentioned, I am with Rama Consulting and we were excited to be brought on board to help facilitate this important strategic planning process with you all. We started the process back in November, and it was a very, very fast forward and aggressive timeline that was set forth, but we were able to accommodate that timeline appropriately, and now we are happy to share with you the final results of that plan. So as Naomi's getting the slideshow up and ready to go, today, basically what we want to do is do three things. One, we're going to just kind of share a process overview, bring everyone up to speed. Luckily, a lot of you have been engaged in this process from the beginning. And so you're pretty much up to speed onto where we are, kind of our approach and everything. Naomi, if you can switch the view because we're currently seeing, yeah. So like I said, the board has been along the way in this entire process. And so we've been lucky to keep you abreast as we go, but we basically will just kind of share a brief overview of our process and who we were able to speak to during this process. And then we will also share with you all the strategic framework, which as Steve mentioned was made up of 5 priority areas, and each priority area contains several different goals. I'll start with the slide. Naomi, if you can advance the slide that does our process overview. So just to bring everyone up to speed, we always start our process with kickoff meeting, and we like to call our planning phase the LPD model because it's comprised of a learning phase where we take time to learn about the organization, understand your strategic priorities and goals, any initiatives that you currently have going on so that we can ensure we develop a process that will get you to your end goal. And a big piece of that process is not only looking at different documents and things like that, but it's really talking to the people who matter the most, the people that your work impacts every day. And so we spent a lot of time doing surveys. We did a couple of focus groups with the staff, and we also did a community summit as well as a community survey. And the community summit was allowed individuals, your partners who you work with, to come together for half a day and really speak to us and give some recommendations and perspective to the strategic goals that had been identified by the board. All in all, we were able to engage during this process about 124 individuals, which was pretty good. Once we got through our learning phase, we then embarked on what we call our planning phase. And we worked with the board to not only validate, as I said, the emerging priorities that came from those conversations, but we also began to do strategy and goal development, and then got down to key actions as well as success indicators. And so we spent about 8 hours with various members of the Board of Trustees, really digging into these items. And again, the result is what we will share with you here today. And our documentation phase, you all currently have the copy of the strategic plan document. In addition to that document, you will receive what we refer to as our executive summary. And it's just a condensed version of that document that can be shared externally that overviews your priorities and your strategies that are a part of your strategic plan. Next slide, please, Naomi. These were the 5 priority areas that emerged from our engagement work. The first one was around organizational development. And so really in this area, we looked at culture and we looked at staffing. How do we create a culture that is inclusive, that is communicative, and where everyone feels they are working together in a cohesive manner towards the organization's end result. And then the second area that we focused on was staffing. So that was really about training and developing our internal staff, as well as adequately preparing new staff for success so that they are also able to come in and make meaningful contributions from day one. The second area was around strengthening the service delivery system. And the 2 areas that we focused on here were how do we improve system provider relationships to again positively impact client and family outcomes, and workforce development. We know that there is a huge behavioral workforce gap. And so the board really wanted to be intentional about how they can support the system and the workforce and ensuring that there's capacity there to meet the needs of the community. The third area we refer to is equity in action. And there are 2 areas here as well. The first area was health equity, and the second area was creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive work environment. You all may remember that maybe about 2 years ago, the agency created an equity in action strategy, and we were able to be a part of that as well. And so a big part of this priority area is integrating those elements from that strategy that help to not only further your health equity goals, but also make sure that your work environment is diverse, equitable, and inclusive for your staff. So externally, but also internally. The third area was the technological infrastructure. So really looking at your systems, processes, and data management. And as Steve mentioned earlier, there's an organization, Ascend Innovations, I believe they are there, and they will talk more about that once we get to this area. And the last area was around outreach and engagement. And the 2 focus areas there were communications and engagement. So basically there we're focused on making sure we are communicating the right information to the right people and engaging the right people in our work that can help to support and further the efforts. Next slide, please. Hopefully you guys can see this in the room, but I think it is also included, in your packet. I see Senna flipping pages there. So the first priority area was, again, organizational development. And the goal that was developed was a thriving organization with an inclusive culture, high-performing teams, and adequate internal capacity to support our mission and continuous improvement. The first strategy area was around culture. And so the strategy there was to create a network of human capital and resources that leads to increased collaboration, engagement, and trust amongst staff and board members. For each of these strategies, the board were able to identify several key actions and that would help them in executing on the strategy. And so for the strategy focused on culture, they were committed to integrating the appropriate elements from the equity and action strategy, mainly those around the leadership best practice area. And if you recall, that's really about leadership setting the tone, setting the expectations for the organization when it comes to equity, but also just when it comes to how the organization will operate in general, as well as looking to explore opportunities to foster improved teamwork and cohesiveness and increase and improve communication throughout the organization, making sure that everyone within the organization is kept abreast of the initiatives, of what's happening, of progress, and can speak to those with some level of authority. The second area was around staffing. And so the strategy there was to continue to develop a high-performing team capable of recognizing, understanding, and responding to community needs quickly. The board really felt here that it was important that we are developing a team who not only is able to respond, but they understand what's needed when they are speaking with clients, and they're able to respond in a quick manner. And so some of the key actions that were identified to effectively execute on this strategy included to utilize the organizational assessment to build out the remainder of the organization chart. Some of this work has already been done, so that will be leveraged where possible. And then where there's additional work that needs to be done, the board will embark upon that to ensure that the organization is right size and that the structure is adequate to meeting the needs of its clients. They are also committed to evaluating their onboarding and performance appraisal processes. They want to make sure that as they bring individuals on, they're receiving the right information and the necessary support to ensure their success, as well as making sure that the performance appraisal process is adequate to ascertaining employees' developmental needs, where they are, how well they perform, but it can also be used as a method to help identify training and development needs, right? And so the strategies within the equity and action strategy will also support this because there's a best practice area around training, development, and advancement. So that will also be a part of their execution, as well as other opportunities to provide training and opportunity internally based on needs that have been identified. The second priority area, go back please, Naomi. The second priority area is around strengthening the service delivery system. And the goal here was a collaborative and diverse behavioral health system delivering culturally relevant services that meet the needs of Lucas County residents. The first strategy area was around the system provider relations. And so that is the strategy there is to strengthen existing and cultivate new provider relationships to foster positive outcomes for consumers and families. And so in order to effectively execute on this strategy, some of the key actions that the board identified were to enhance collaboration with community partners and identify innovative practices within the behavioral health field to improve client outcomes. Innovation is really big right now, not just in this field, but we want to make sure that we're being intentional about understanding where we can be innovative and try new things to really improve and expand the impact that you're having on your clients. And so that's one of the areas, or one of the key actions that the board has committed to doing. They've also said they will utilize capabilities that have been created or will be created by the Information Transformation Process Plan in order to consolidate consumer and family data, but also improve data reporting and monitoring. They're starting to make great strides in the performance data that they are developing, as Bill just alluded to. And so that is also a part of executing on this particular strategy. And then lastly, again, looking at how they will address transportation barriers. This arose as a major barrier during our engagement activities with some of the staff as well as some of the partners. And so the board has said that they will do what they can to work with appropriate individuals or agencies within the community to try and reduce these barriers for clients. The second strategy area within this priority area is workforce development. Again, we know that this is a huge issue, not just for behavioral health, but for a lot of industries right now. And so the strategy here is to support providers in strengthening their workforce to meet the demands of the behavioral health care system. And one of the things that the board has said they will do is to create a workforce training program that will lead to entry-level behavioral health certification. This will allow them to be able to leverage the existing talent that is currently within the system and train them for roles that they may not currently be qualified for, meaning those that require certification. They have also committed to collaborating with local educational institutions to identify opportunities to retain local talent within the behavioral health system. During our community engagement forum, there was conversation around the University of Toledo graduates behavioral health individuals with behavioral health degrees every day. And those individuals are leaving Lucas County and going to other areas to work. And so there's probably, some work that can be done there to identify why they're leaving and to identify some retention strategies so that they can stay locally and help close the workforce gap that exists. Priority area number 3, again, is the equity and action strategy. The overall goal there is that equity is effectively integrated into our overall strategy and operations. For health equity, the strategy is simple. We're going to execute the strategies that are in the equitable service delivery best practice area of the equity and action strategy. That strategy, like I said earlier, it speaks to not only how you create equity amongst your clients and within the system, but also internally, which leads to the second strategy area of creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive work environment. And again, there, the strategy is to execute the strategies within the staff and workplace environment best practice areas of the equity and action strategy. Next slide, please, ma'am. Priority area number 4 is the technological infrastructure. The goal there is that systems and processes allow for improved data management practices that create efficiencies, provide transparency, and support informed decision-making that lead to better behavioral health outcomes. And there, again, the main focus area is looking at the systems, processes, and data management within the organization. And the main strategy is to execute the existing information transformation process plan. So at this time, I will pause and I will allow the individuals who are in the room to prepare to speak on this topic to take over.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm actually going to have our team stay seated, if that's okay, so we're not up shuffling around as we're dancing through the various aspects of the presentation. But for starters, I'll have the team do quick intros so that you kind of have a sense of their backgrounds as they're going through each part of the presentation. And we'll have Casey do this up.
Sounds great. Hi all, I'm Casey Smith. I have a master's in public health. I'm a certified health education specialist. My background for the last 7 years was working for a large local health department in the Dayton area. Recently transitioned to Ascend Innovations as an accountant project manager. The last 3 years of my public health career were overdose prevention specifically. So familiar with the behavioral health space, and thank you for having us.
Hey everyone, Alec Ralston, Director of Engineering at Ascend. So I was primarily working with the technical aspects of this project. My background is actually primarily in cybersecurity. I worked for probably a decade and a half in various cybersecurity vendors, and previous to that, Department of Defense, and now I'm at Ascend.
Andrew Sokolnicki, excuse me, Senior Accountant Project Manager, prior work experience, 10 years at the Montgomery County Adams Board, 3 years at OMOS, and prior to that I worked at multiple provider organizations within Montgomery County, master's degree in public administration.
And I'm Josh Gratch, President and CEO of Ascend. My background is in math and operations research. Been with the company for 6 years now, and a lot of my responsibilities over the past few years have been shaping and building relationships with hospitals, community health organizations, behavioral health organizations across the state as we're really taking a data-driven approach to enabling organizations to leverage data and digital solutions to make decisions. So first and foremost, thanks for having us here today. Ascend is a community health technology company out of Dayton that is working with community health organizations, behavioral health organizations, et cetera, across the state to build and deliver data-driven solutions. So we've worked with 9 recovery boards so far on various aspects of their respective strategies, and certainly understand the weight of this ITP project and the foundation that it sets for the future operations of the board. So one thing to note before we go forward, we are presenting at a very high level for this, but we have printed out our final report as well as this slide deck that has an appendix with more details on the specific facets of the project that we will talk about. So feel free to dig into those and ask us questions at any point in time. But if we could go to the next slide, please. So over the past 6 months, our team has performed a discovery effort where we have traveled up here and worked virtually to dive into the team operations, workflow, etc. of the board to kind of better understand the processes as a whole, including technology requirements, which really tie into our findings and recommendations that we will discuss with you all. So as far as our findings, we will talk through the conversations and the processes that we mapped out for each of the departments and teams outlined under bullet number 1, and then also talk through the areas of opportunity within each of those functions and departments. Then we'll talk through recommendations that will really serve as the basis for phase 2 of the ITP. And we'll walk through, give you an overview of that, talk through activities, responsibilities, and cost associated with the phase 2 of the ITP project. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll hand it over to Andrew to begin walking through the specific departments.
Thank you, Josh. So, again, as part of our discovery back in September, we came and we interviewed multiple individuals within the organization, covering 5 different departments. The first one that we're going to touch on is the program and services area. High level, there are multiple opportunities to improve internal collaboration here, and improve document storage, access information, and additionally work on workflow management tasks. Through no fault of their own, data and information gatekeepers currently exist within the organization. So increasing organization-wide access and education on data would only benefit the community at large. Next slide, please. The board's physical technology and software is currently outdated. There are I was going to stick a joke in there, but you're
Get it.
The board's physical technology and software is currently outdated. There are multiple opportunities which exist to significantly upgrade these. Interlinking continuum of care data sets will only improve decision-making and planning within the organization. Next slide, please. We sat down with our friendly finance department, and a couple of things to touch on. As contracting and the finance department continue their integration, as we discovered that was occurring when we came here the first time around, there is many instances that currently exist where redundancies can potentially be streamlined. Opportunities exist for increasing proficiencies and efficiencies, whether through process or technology. Next slide. Community engagement and equity. Better insights into community engagement rates with the board managed outreach efforts would provide the ability to perform more targeted campaigns and inform efforts around population disparities within Lucas County. Utilizing data there will only allow you to improve your ability to target those specialized populations. Next slide, please. And lastly, we interviewed Scott and a couple of trustees. So, current organization, just some feedback we received there were that current organizational workflows at large are siloed. Current technology does not allow for efficient interfacing between departments. Remote work, although possible, is currently challenging. And lastly, as always, having access to timely and accurate continuum of care behavioral health data was a topic of discussion. At this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Casey, and she'll discuss some of the areas of opportunity that currently exist.
Great, thank you. So in summary and everything that Andrew just shared, our discovery work really looked at the board's operations. We looked at existing business processes, the technology supporting those processes, and how data is flowing throughout the board and the organization. And what we found is that the board's current technology and data infrastructure is antiquated and in need of updates. By making these updates, it will ensure that the board's internal operations are running as effectively as possible, and it's really going to allow the board greater insights into the community. For the remainder of the presentation, what we're going to focus on is the recommended efforts that a prime vendor would undertake as part of phase 2 of the ITP, all of which are focused on internal board operations. Throughout the findings, what we would like to note is there is absolutely opportunity to look at acquiring external data and looking at how the board could harness external data to really make data-driven decisions. And we would recommend that be something that's looked at as future phases of the ITP. So next slide, please. Next slide. Great, so this slide is an overview of 5 efforts that we'll describe in greater detail on the future slide. But again, phase 2 is solely focused on the technology and data infrastructure of the board's internal operations. So we're looking at internal function at this point in time. We're recommending that the prime vendor would focus on the following buckets of efforts: data governance, acquisition of new technology, migration to a cloud-based infrastructure, which would create for a remote office environment when necessary. We would also recommend looking at prioritizing workflows and business processes for both migration, but also potential re-engineering of those processes once we have rolled out new technology and infrastructure. And then vital to the success of any of these efforts would be the ongoing monitoring of the new technology and infrastructure that's been rolled out to ensure that it's continuing to function in the most optimal form. Next slide, please. And I will turn it over to Alec now to talk a bit through about responsibilities related to proposed phase 2 efforts.
Thanks, Casey. So with some of the areas of opportunity in mind, what we wanted to do is propose what's known as a shared responsibility model for the board. And essentially what this is focused on is areas where you can strategically partner with various vendors or service providers in various areas of technical expertise to offload some of those particular areas from being completely on the shoulders of the board to a vendor who specializes in this area. So the next 2 slides, there's a bunch of rows here that kind of focus on particular aspects of the technical migration. I'm going to talk about it in buckets just in the interest of time, but if you have questions about a particular line, I can dig into it more. So just let me know if you have a question about something in particular. So this first slide is mostly focusing on like responsibilities that will be passed off particularly to a specialist. So at the top there would be things like data state mapping passed off to a prime vendor or a data vendor. So this is things like identifying what data do we have, where does it live, who needs access to it, what does the schema look like, are there data quality issues, things like that. The next 2 we're mostly focused on transitioning to a managed services IT provider. And this is things like device configuration and management, on-premises network management. So instead of the board being responsible for those things, there would be a contracted managed services IT provider that will provide things like hardware support, help desk support. Do I have a problem with my laptop? Can I get help with it? We had a new employee. Can that laptop be configured for them, everything installed, and provided to them with documentation, training, and everything like that. And then the big blue section at the bottom is everything that would be transitioned to a cloud services provider. In this instance, we identified Microsoft in particular as being appropriate for this, given the existing productivity suite that the board uses and what Microsoft's capabilities are and its pricing structure, things like that. So there's 5 or 6 different categories here. There's things like once we transition the data from being on site in a drive and a Q drive, as the board knows, to a cloud drive where it'll be maintained by Microsoft, then things like the physical security of the data become the responsibility of Microsoft and not necessarily the responsibility of the board. So when we say passing off responsibility, that's the kind of things that we mean. They're responsible for operating their infrastructure, they're responsible for operating like the uptime of the productivity suite, and it doesn't just fall to the board in order to maintain those things. Next slide, please. And so these would be shared responsibilities, so not just primarily passed off to a new vendor. So things like data strategy and data governance, obviously this is a primary responsibility of the board. But in conjunction with the prime vendor and with the managed services IT provider, it can be identified, okay, what does the data strategy need to be? Where does the data live? Who needs access to it? How do we access that? What are the technical aspects of how we get the data to who needs access to that data? And then on the third line, things like equipment acquisition and leasing. So executing the leasing agreement, purchasing the laptops, distributing the laptops. Next line being data migration, so the actual physical migration of the data from on-premises to the cloud drive. Creation of the data tools and maintenance of those tools. So creating ways for people to access data on an ad hoc basis. Can I query the data that I need? Can I get access to it, do my job on a day-to-day basis? And the last 4 sections are more just technical aspects around account identity management. So does somebody leave the board? How do we disable their accounts? Is there a new employee? How do we get new accounts from them? Security monitoring of all the infrastructure. So that would be things like Microsoft monitoring their infrastructure and managed services IT provider monitoring the board's infrastructure around like laptops and things like that. IT support services, so much this earlier, things like help desk, and then the last one would be transitioning from physical phones on site to VoIP. So being able to make calls from your laptop from anywhere and not just having to be at your desk or to get voicemail and make calls. So the overall idea here being, these are all foundational aspects to migrate the board to a more modern infrastructure and then harden it against things like getting back to an unideal state in the future. Next slide, please. So these are the proposed projects as part of the phase 2 recommendations. I'll talk about the first 2 because these are the more technical ones, and I'll pass it back to Casey to talk about the last 3. So the infrastructure setup, implementation, training, and monitoring. This is basically encompasses everything I just talked about. So it's acquiring the equipment, buying the licenses, moving the data to the cloud, configuring all the laptops for the users, creating all the documentation and training the users on how to use their new equipment and productivity suite. And then the second project there being the current data state map and data migration. So identifying where is all the data, what is it, who needs access to it, what is data that could go into archive because we don't need it on a day-to-day basis, and then actually migrating that data into the cloud. And I'll pass it back to Casey to talk about the last 3.
Thanks. So I will pick up at the future state data flow mapping. So in addition to mapping out where data currently lives, what data is available, we also recommend that the prime vendor would look at future state data and what data the board would want for future work related to your mission and achieving future ITP phases. So this would inform on future data strategy, access to additional data, potentially looking at external data sets, and needed tools to support the board's mission. And ideally out of this, your prime vendor would be able to develop specific recommendations for a phase 3 of the ITP. The fourth effort there is related to business process re-engineering. We're recommending here that the prime vendor would document all current board processes and map any needed improvements to those processes now that you would have rolled out this new technology and infrastructure. Through the discovery in phase 1, we found undocumented processes, and then coupling that with the move to cloud-based operations and new technology for the staff within the board, it would be important that we reevaluated business processes and re-engineer those processes where needed to streamline workflows for the board and ensure that they're reflective of the new technology that has been rolled out. Ultimately, the business process re-engineering would also reduce redundancies, duplication of efforts. It's going to eliminate single points of failure if only one person within the board knew where the data was housed or how the processes worked, and ideally increase overall efficiencies in terms of workflows. And then the final project here is related to data governance and management, probably one of the most critical to the success of phase 2 in the ITP. Would be supporting the board as they develop and implement a data governance strategy. Effective governance is going to be important because it's going to ensure that the board's data is managed consistently, and it's really going to create a framework that is connecting your board staff to the processes and technology that exists within the board space, and it's going to assign responsibility for who within the board operations is accountable and responsible for what data. So if you would go to the next slide, now we have a overall cost breakout of the proposed phase 2 ITP efforts. You'll see here, again, line item estimated ranges of costs for each of the 5 efforts that were just discussed, in addition to a travel line item should your prime vendor be out of town or off-site. You'll see here that the estimated total to complete the 5 phase 2 efforts is roughly $703,000 to $903,000. Of that total, it's estimated that roughly $179,000 to $251,000 of that would go specifically to an IT subcontractor for the acquisition of new technology and migration of all data. Each of these, just quick background, each of these cost ranges were carefully constructed for each of the efforts. Activities were mapped out that would, intermediary activities, if you will, that it would take to achieve that overall effort. So in your full report, there is a breakdown of each of the activities associated with the efforts with an estimated cost for each of those activities. And then additionally, as it relates to the IT subcontractor costs, we did vet a few subcontractors to get a feel for what the technology acquisition, leasing of hardware, data transition to that cloud-based infrastructure would cost. And now I'll turn it over to Josh to round us out. Next slide, please. Thank you.
So to quickly sum up, I'll reiterate that we understand the importance of this effort for the board's future operations. It's one of the most significant investments the board has made in terms of internal technology and infrastructure to date. So with any investment, I would be asking what's the return, and as the consultant and a third party on this project, we can confidently say that there are measurable long-term benefits to the operations of the organization. And so first, it modernizes the workflow and the operations of the board, which is critical given how we all know the environment has changed over the past couple years. So it'll enable the team to be up to industry standards with technology. And I'll say I appreciate the humility of the laughter and the humor of the board, knowing like, yes, we know we need to update our technology. I love that in a board meeting. And of course can work in a distributed and remote manner. It also standardizes and modernizes the workflow so that the team can operate efficiently and effectively in a cross-functional manner across those departments that we talked about. Ultimately, we want the team focused on their core responsibilities, not worrying about technology and infrastructure issues, which is a lot of what Alex showed in his slides, where originally those are responsibilities of the board. We're getting that off of the board's day-to-day and onto the providers and the prime vendor that we outlined. So secondly, the project sets the foundation for future phases of the ITP. It will support streamlined board operations, data aggregation and analyses, allocation of funding, programs and services, etc. And one thing specifically I want to call out here, and you all know this, but I want to re-emphasize it, that the board is statutorily tasked by Ohio Revised Code 340 to plan, fund, monitor, and evaluate the continuum of behavioral health services across the community. And not only that, but deliver preventative and proactive services. And that's really challenging without data. And what this project is going to do is to set the board up to collect disparate data sets in the community to help drive towards data-driven decision-making in the future. Lastly, I'll just say the board will be leading by example in the region by instilling data sharing, collaboration, advanced technology as the cultural norm for community health organizations, which is relevant because while I know there's humor around like we know we need to update our technology, given what we've seen across the state in these organizations, you're not the only one, right? Like there's many organizations that haven't even considered going through this process. So I will say, like, you are going to be leading edge by going through a significant transformation like this to set you up for the future. So that certainly carries weight in terms of the importance of this project. So lastly, just thank you for allowing us to present to you today. It's been a pleasure to work with your team. I appreciate the time everybody spent with us to dig into these things, and we're happy to answer any questions when appropriate.
Does anybody have any questions? Jokes? Hopefully this will be our last shot to make them. So.
The whole time, I have a friend who lost her phone and is trying to do some things, and she said, it's lost somewhere in the iCloud. I go, I know, the clouds. And so every time iCloud came up, I was sitting here chuckling, thinking about all the clouds that have all the information.
And Danetta, you have a comment?
Yeah, great presentation. It was very detailed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, we've been beating our heads around this for a long time on a lot of fronts as we work through priorities, as we work through transitions of service providers in a lot of areas. For us to legitimately be able to stay ahead of the curve in terms of how we support the treatment that goes on in this community by our partners, we have to have good data and information available to us to make the right decisions quickly and to be able to respond appropriately. And if we're going to go back to taxpayers and ask for more dollars, to be able to demonstrate, we need to be able to demonstrate the needs where those dollars are going to be spent, and we have to have the data to be able to do that, and it has to be easily accessible and to help us better evaluate where we are. So this is a long time coming to get us to where we are today.
Which is why
and
you
I
guys
appreciate
hear a
the
lot
work
of
that your team
chuckles.
has done
And,
to-
you know, and how many times we've asked for data, and it's like, we can't get it. We have to figure it out. So I think that that's, very important. And Jim, I agree totally with what you said.
Absolutely. And, as stewards, good stewards, which each one of us take this so seriously, this is going to empower the board in a way that I feel like we can't even imagine. Like, there's part of me that can see some things, and then there's a part of me that's like, wow, can you imagine when an issue comes up that's new and being able to track it from beginning to the time we resolve it, and what worked, what didn't work, who was affected by it, what was the time span. You know, I just sit and think of pivot tables, and I get excited. So, I'm like, yes, can you imagine all the what could be done with this data is literally endless and very empowering. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, Jim, for reminding us about how long we've struggled with this.
It's all right.
Like, how do we?
We've done pretty well with what we've had, but we could do so much better if we have better information data.
And just the opportunity to lead in the state by being state of the art is just an amazing place. It's what Toledo's known for.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions on this component of the strategic plan, we're going to move back to the strategic plan presentation. Naomi, Tiffany, whenever you're ready, thank you very much. And when that component is done, there's a little bit more to talk about, and then we'll sum up.
Okay. So, priority area 5, the last area or the last priority area of the plan is around outreach and engagement. The goal there is comprehensive and effective relationships that increase awareness, improve community engagement, and promote accountable financial stewardship. And so the first focus area there is around communications, and the strategy is to amplify the work of the board through effective communications with existing and new stakeholders. And so some of the action items that the board has committed to doing here to support the execution of this strategy is, one, to onboard a full-time communications manager. And then they want to make sure that they are providing targeted outreach to community groups that promote recovery and mental wellness, and that they continue to funding the community awareness program. You know, the big piece here around the communications piece is that, you know, we also hear, you guys shared, that a lot of people still don't know that you exist and what you do, even with the mass impact that you have and as far as your reach is. And so some of these actions the board felt would help to promote the work of the board more, specifically that targeted outreach piece. And then the second focus area was around engagement, and the strategy there was to engage the broader community to inform, educate, and increase awareness of the board and its program services and financial stewardship. And so some of the big key actions there are to engage the private sector, to increase awareness of the board and the work that you all do. That's not currently something that's being done on a large scale, as well as to develop a strategy to engage the underserved and increase the financial transparency of the board. When we discussed this in the planning session, the thought was that if the board can engage the right people, develop the right relationships, and increase the transparency of how they're spending the money that the taxpayers are allocating each time the levy comes up, then the trust of the communication can increase and the funding will also increase. So that's kind of how the board came to that last strategy area. So for each of these strategies that we've discussed today, the board has identified several different success indicators. These success indicators, they will monitor the progress on and report the success quarterly or however often they will do that, but they've developed some really good indicators that can help to determine if or not these strategies have been successful in accomplishing the goals that have been set forth. So with that, that also concludes our presentation of the 2023-2025 strategic plan. I would just like to also say thank you to the board for allowing us to facilitate this aggressive process with you all. Always a pleasure to work with the board and the staff there. And I will take any questions at this time.
Are there no questions?
Sure. I don't know that it's exactly a question or a comment, but I guess to both of our presenters, when Tiffany talked about priority area 5, I'm sure it's in here. I see it in here, but it's not specifically called out. For me, I think it will be critical that priority area 5 works hand in glove with the ITP area and the need for us to educate the community, our stakeholders, our providers about the importance and how we will use, protect, and maintain security around the data that we are asking for and that is vital for all of the reasons that have been presented. Because I think the comment that Ms. Locke made about information floating out in the cloud is out there. And there are a lot of people who are concerned about it, particularly given the unfortunate stigma that still exists in the world around mental health and substance abuse.
Thank you, Nima. Thank you. Absolutely. It is important that it's secure and safe and that the data is used appropriately. That's something we'd all be concerned with as a board. So, thank you.
I'd like to thank our consultants who kept us focused through this process, allowed us to hone in on the areas that are most important, and also to identify the specific deliverables in each one of these areas, in each one of these priorities that we need to focus on.
Yeah.
So you did a great job on keeping us all focused to get to that result.
And on the fast track. You know, we accomplished a lot in a very short period of time. So thank you, Tiffany, and thank you to the four of you, and thank you to the board. I mean, without you participating, we would not have been able to do any of this. It would have just kind of fallen flat. So thank you for being flexible and committed and passionate. We appreciate it.
There are no further comments. I simply wanted to thank the trustees as well. From the staff's perspective, the level of engagement and involvement in both of these was tremendous, and we wouldn't be here without you, so thank you. And to the vendors, the consultants, both of them, for working to put together a presentation. They've never worked together before this, and they did it seamlessly. I felt it enabled the technology. If nothing else, this demonstrates what technology can do. And as part of infrastructure, to Nima's comment, infrastructure is human capital as well. It's the human beings, their training and education. It isn't just that little piece of technology that's putting that up there, it's all of it. And we absolutely recognize the tremendous responsibility that we incur by moving forward with this. Now, on the bottom of page 14, there is a motion for your consideration. The Mental Health and Recovery Services Board of Lucas County adopts its 2023 strategic plan and accepts the recommendations of the Phase 1 ITP Discovery Report as a component of the plan as presented at the January 13th, 2023 board meeting.
January 17th.
Oh, thank you, January 17th.
I so moved.
Second. We're not over enthusiastic, are we?
No.
Thank you, everybody. Susan, do you want to do roll call?
Just a small point, Senator. The plan itself refers to itself as the 2022 plan, and we're voting, this says 2023. So I don't think we need to change anything other than just to note in the minutes that we are in fact talking about the same document.
Oh, yes. 2023.
Yes, and we did notice, Scott and team, that the cover said that, so we are having that updated to accurately reflect the dates that this plan is for.
Tiffany, I'll have one more change for you too that's very minimal, but we can handle that offline.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Ms. Bell?
Yes.
Ms. Carter?
Yes.
Reverend Gordon?
Yes.
Ms. Harding?
Yes.
Ms. Mendoza-Locke?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Stengel?
Yes.
Major White?
Yes.
Thank you, Susan. Now we're going to turn it over to you, Scott.
Again, I need to thank Tiffany and the folks from Ascend and all the staff at Rama that contributed, and you guys. I think we redefined for ourselves and for Rama, the length of time it takes to do a strategic plan.
Can you say sprint?
As I've been telling staff, it's just time and energy, right?
That's right.
And so it was important that we get this done before we start to consider our next purchasing plan. This is something that the board has discussed year in, year out as we do our strategic planning, and to align our strategic planning and our ITP recommendations along with our purchasing for the next fiscal year makes sound business sense. And so energy and effort and time was well spent, so thank you. Now you all may be wondering why we put together this event, which by the way, congratulations to your IT staff too for making this the IT process work. We weren't quite sure how this was all going to work out. It worked out well. Right? So the I wanted to remind you, I just take the opportunity to remind you that we saw a price tag for what's likely to be phase 2 of somewhere around $900,000. There was considerable energy and effort that went into developing that. It's a range, obviously. Could go up a little, could go down a little, depends on what other stuff we add into it. But I wanted to remind you that the board did set aside $1.2 million of underspending from fiscal year 22 so that we could take this project on. But we're really talking about phase 2 projects. We have phase 3 and phase 4 yet that may still have to be funded.
Yes.
But if we, and I don't suggest we do this, but if we ever decide that phase 3 and 4 isn't something we want to consider, we will be considerably better off just by accomplishing phase 1 and 2. So they are compartmentalized, but we don't want to stop with phase 2, but I just want to incrementally, there's successes to be had each and every time along the way. That's the first thing I wanted to mention, and I wanted to say thank you to Tiffany once again, and we're going to go ahead and turn this light off here so that we can see, because I'm starting to see blue.
Thanks, Scott. I'm going to bed. It's after midnight here. I'll see you guys later.
Good night, Tiffany. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I don't want to let the moment pass without providing an update to our staffing with the addition of Ms. Shannon Hitch, our accounting specialist, who has hit the ground running and already contributing positively. We have 4 positions that are still open: our senior manager of programs and services, my executive assistant, a grants manager, and a technology systems analyst position. They are continuing to be advertised, some positions are getting a little bit more information or a little bit more response than others, and so this is going to be a grind that we're going to have to continue to just identify quality applicants and vet those applicants in a timely manner. And we will continue to do that. Also want to give you an update on our board recruitment process. If you recall, I think it's the Executive Nominating Committee earlier, we had a strategy to do a considerable amount of advertising for new positions. We have 2 positions that are open. That's going to prove unlikely unnecessary. We had 2 quality candidates come in right away. One has already been presented for appointment, and Senna and I are, Senna is
we're a team. Team effort.
Vetting the second candidate, which is an extremely appropriate candidate, and we can't imagine, unless there's some other reason that we don't know, that we wouldn't make that recommendation for appointment as well. So at that point, we would have a full board, first time in probably a year. And then There are some questions about term dates and everything, and I can go ahead and provide that to you all so that you know, but I don't expect any more turnover in the board until the 2024 timeframe. Also wanted to reference that while we did present a motion and approve the motion related to the withholding of funds for the audits, we did have one organization turn in their audit already. So it didn't impact the motion, but Ohio Guidestone did turn their audit in, so their funds will not be withheld. We have been working with a number of different entities to redevelop our strategy around Latinx services in the community. If you recall, that didn't go as well as we had hoped. I've had several conversations in one large meeting with Toledo Public Schools. We're kind of in the data collection phase around where services should be considered. So we've received information from Toledo Public Schools, and we have an idea of what they're requesting as priorities. We are also reaching out to other schools that we believe may have a large Latino population in the footprints that are most likely to house them, in particular 09 and 05. Staff are currently doing that work, and we'll integrate that work in. Of course, we have the needs assessment that was completed. So we have, what we hope to do is have the where and the what. The next question would be the who, right? Correct.
I'm like sitting here going, okay, who?
And so we know that we will have to build that. And we've committed to using a health equity strategy where we will not be the ones that come in and say, this organization's going to do that, but we want the community to tell us who has their support and their quality foundation to build upon the services that we hope to develop. And then from there, put our energies and efforts around wrapping support around that organization to uplift them to provide those services. So that's the current strategy. We continue to work on that, although we're in the earlier phases of just the data identity, which is timely, right? Considering the data information discussions. And then finally, I wanted to give you a brief presentation on where we're at with Danny's Place. There is a lot going on. And we held our third facilities design session 2 weeks ago, about a week and a half ago now. And that meeting was also, in that meeting, we held our first fundraising committee session. And then they met together and then separated and came back for just for report out. We are well into our facilities design, and once the committee signs off the facilities design, my goal would be to bring that to you in a more official fashion so that you can kind of get a feel for where we're at and how we're going about it. We also have a strategy for fundraising. At the last meeting, I reported that the state approved nearly $90 million in capital funding for crisis and continuum of care infrastructure build out. Within that $90 million is an amount that is designated for 6 regional centers, these step-down units. We are one of those. And while we don't know the amount of money, we are hoping to get somewhere nearly $6 million of those funds. which will be the official request coming out of the fundraising, fund development committee. And that will very likely be a joint recommendation or a joint request from our board and NAMI Ohio, who is helping us and supporting us in our fundraising. So if you're doing the math, if we need 10 million and 10 million is a guess, we think it might be a little high, but it's still a guess because we don't know the construction's cost yet. We're not quite there. We already have 2.5 million, that 500 that you presented for the project, and 2 million that Marcy Kapter's office secured for us for the building of this facility that they've given to NAMI Ohio for this facility. So we're at essentially, what is that number? That is $8.5 million with 1.5 to go, and we haven't even done a private fundraising campaign yet. So we are, if we are lucky enough to get the state funds, which we believe that will be received positively, it is very possible that we are on our way to selecting a construction manager after the RFP is released, and then fast tracking to shovels in the ground.
Wow.
Hopefully, I don't know, David, what do you think? 6, 7, 8 months from now?
Yeah, I was gonna say summer, yeah. Early summer, maybe.
Summer, yeah.
That's the goal.
Do we have a lease?
We have an agreed upon lease pending zoning, and we need to get the survey. So the lease between us and Ohio Moss is settled, with the exception of designating the actual parcel.
Yeah, but that's.
And that's a product of survey.
That's the
Survey.
big- You've taken the big step. That's
Yeah,
great. Thank
yeah.
you.
And that is, we finalized the, actually, we have the surveyor and all the groundwork, the engineers that are gonna be doing that. We have that individual selected. We've negotiated the MOU for that, or MOA, I guess it would be. And language is being vetted by the prosecutor's office right now. As soon as they sign off, we're good to go, and that work can be done. And then that, of course, informs not just finalizing the lease, but also then tells us what we need to do in relation to zoning. And so we are targeting a May 1st timeline for our private fundraising event to coincide with May is Mental Health Month, and our May 1st systems recognition event. We hope to be doing it all on one day. So there is a lot going on. Michael and his team is
Holding their breath.
working very hard, Amy and her team, and now we're starting to get the realization of how do we deal with a construction project of $10 million without never having gone through something like that before. So all facets of the organization are involved in this, and several of the trustees are involved in the fundraising events as well. And so it's just an exciting time to be working here at the board. So with that, in the interest of time, I will forego any additional comments and then be happy to answer any questions.
Do you have any questions for Scott?
Can you give us a high-level heads-up of what Phase 3 and Phase 4 of the ITP might look like? What would be the focus of those?
I will certainly defer that to Mr. Spinelli.
Essentially, they would be, we looked at, Phase 1 was a discovery phase for internal operations for this organization. Phase 2 was implementing the recommendations. Phase 3 would be looking at the county-wide system of behavioral health and other components of it. Phase 4 would be the implementation of recommendations from the third phase. So essentially, what we were able to do here.
Go from internal to external?
Yes, sir, that's it, exactly.
That's good, okay, thank you.
Thank you. You were ready.
Well, thank you, Scott. Do we have any other questions for Scott before we move to open session? All right. Well, do we have anything for open session? Thank you, Richard.
City Council starts today their budget hearings. Every city department will come before them and ask for money in their budget The one that interests me most is at 1 p.m. on Monday. That's the safety committee that oversees the Toledo Police Department. I've been talking to both council members and Toledo Police about, do they have the right number of non-lethal weapons in their arsenal? We know that they have plenty of other weapons. They just spent $140,000 on new shotguns. But I've been talking to them about what's been going on in Detroit. If you're not following this, in October, they had a mentally ill man who was brandishing a knife. They tried to taser him, didn't work, so he lunged at them, and they fired 38 shots in 3 seconds. His family hired Jeffrey Feiger, probably the biggest ambulance chaser in the state of Michigan. He's making comments like, they should have used tranquilizer darts on him, and they're suing the city of Detroit for $50 million. And then in November, they had a mother with children ages 7 and 1. She was holed up in a basement. They shot her. That family is also filing a $50 million lawsuit. And in their, it's getting to be a regular occurrence, their press conferences, they're talking about, they'll be looking at stuff like bolo wraps. I'm fascinated by this. It's similar to what South American gauchos use. It's a weapon that fires a bolo, and supposedly, according to the manufacturer, incapacitates the person so quickly they wouldn't have time to use a gun or a knife. Toledo does not currently have that. I'm probably going to bring that up next Monday. In addition to mental illness, you have the issue of people who are high on drugs. I don't know if you're following what's going on in Los Angeles. On January the 3rd, a man named Keenan Anderson, he was high on cocaine and marijuana. He crashed his car and then began running in and out of traffic. LAPD showed up, and with plenty of witnesses, they used their tasers, and he died 4 hours later at the hospital. A couple of things they're mentioning. He's the cousin of Patrice Cullors, who's one of the Black Lives Matter founders. And the second thing is that even though the medical examiner has not determined that the tasers caused his death, a lot of people don't care. They've had protests outside the police department. They're comparing it to George Floyd, and they're saying LAPD assassinated this man. Don't think this can't happen here in Toledo. We had an incident, I believe it was March of last year. Toledo police were called to a South Toledo apartment complex. There was a man stabbing himself and screaming that he wanted the police to shoot him. They tried to taser him twice. It did not work. So they did shoot him, not fatally, but Chief Kroll said, we are having a bunch of problems with our tasers. So I hope this board agrees with me that TPD should have in its arsenal as many non-lethal weapons as they possibly can to deal not just with mental health, not just with substance abuse, but with developmental disabilities and autism, people having a reaction to prescription medication, and elderly, anybody that basically can get their hands on a weapon and must be incapacitated. So that hearing is on Monday. I hope to get some answers there. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Does anyone else have anything for us? Okay, with that being done, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.